All right, so we'll go back and we're going to try to finish up or continuing our discussion from before about learning theories, right? So the big one that's seen as most contemporary, right, is social learning theory, which is often, or I often abbreviate it as SLT, right? So social learning theory. So we think of this typically being is not necessarily a new theory per se, but as an elaboration of differential association. So elaboration of DA, which is what I'm calling differential association. And so again, we have the same thing where we assume that behavior is learned. And that there are going to be, like consequences and observing consequences of actions, whether positive or negative, lead to one committing crime or, or not committing crime. So it's, so it borrows a lot from what's already been done and said, and so it just seeks to, like elaborate, right? So, if we think about like what's part of SLT, so we have SLT here. We still have, differential association. So these are people that hang out with others, and when you hang out with others, you are also observing patterns. So patterns of behavior. And again, it follows the same thing that, ones that you are more frequent with, they are they are longer in duration, they're more intense. All of that extends from differential association theory, right? And so it also clarifies a bit what it means about definitions, which is like definitions favorable in excess or lead to more criminal behavior. And this is more, when we think about this kind of thing, it's more like the attached meaning or rationalization for committing crime, right? So, if there are ones where they are, there are moral attitudes towards a behavior, so we should or should not commit something. There are also like the specific behaviors that one does to do it as well. And so like other different theories, right, there is this belief then that behavior, if it continues, is reinforced. So there's going to be differential reinforcement that is related to, it's going to be the actual consequences. So what actually does happen if you do something, or, if you anticipate something to happen. So if you think like a consequence is going to appear, right? And so what this usually turns out to mean is that, there are going to be, if you have a reward, then you are more likely to continue and persist into continuing to commit crime, or that some people, avoid like a punishment. So like because people are believed to be hedonistic, they avoid pain and seek out pleasure, right? So another aspect that's also, kind of comes in then is that, the reason why people end up committing crime is that, they imitate what they see. So they imitate what they see like on television, they imitate what they see from their parents, they imitate people of what they do like in their neighborhood and something like that, because, we're viewed as, they reinforce our behavior in some way. So we see what the perks are, they tell us why it's good to do something, maybe we get praised if we do a certain action, maybe we're punished if we do something, right? So a lot of like why we continue to do things comes from how that behavior is reinforced from those around us. So, so with this social reinforcement behavior, then this leads to more crime. Sorry, turning over my page of notes, right? So, in the way that we, do this, of course, is that we interact with other people, right? Because human beings tend to be more social, so they learn indirect association of behaviors with others. So they learn pros and cons of why you would do something and figure it out from there, right? And there are things that are seen as normative, right? That everyone should do. So these are patterns of norms and values. So, like, if you grew up in a family where, maybe it was seen as normal to do drugs or commit crimes or something like that, you view that as normal because that's what you were exposed to, and it gets reinforced becoming of that, right? So, this is important because if you are associating with certain people, whether that's your friends or your peer group, then the groups, they are responsible for reinforcing. So if there is a social reinforcement from your family to commit crime or from your friends to continue to do bad things, maybe it's a church group or whatever it is, they are responsible for doing it. And this reinforcement can happen positively, where you get a perceived benefit, or it can happen negatively, where you say, hey, this is what happens if you do bad things, or if you don't do something bad, you have XYZ consequences. So the reinforcement can be both positive and negative. So the point being then is, what exactly happens here then? How do we actually use this in practice then? How do we make this useful? And that's something that we always need to be mindful of, when we think about useful implications of learning theory, or any theory for that matter. So when we think about useful implications, right, let's think about if we assume that social learning theory is true, that people learn from behavior, they reinforce behavior, there are going to be consequences where we need to, demonstrate like a behavior is wrong or that something could be reinforced. What happens? Well, if you think about like useful implications, right, one is that we want to reinforce certain behaviors, right? So in some cases, that's going to lead to a punishment of some kind, right? So, we often send people to prison, and I think some people are like, you'll sit there and think about what you did. This is what you get when you, try to hurt other people or something like that, right? Now, how effective that is maybe depends on the community you come from, or what kind of background you have. Some people may not think prison is that bad, or it's like a mark of you actually did time and you're loyal and things like that. So there are consequences of it, but the point of a punishment then is to teach you that there are negative consequences to your behaviors. At the same time, right, some people end up in prison and, they're like, I went to prison. This is a mistake I can overcome. It's reinforcing that I did something wrong. I can learn from this opportunity to get ahead. So sometimes what ends up happening is that there's a need to reorient thinking. And that's often one of the hot new things is through cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the more successful rehabilitative programs and treatments that exist, in that it's designed to consider your thinking about certain practices or behaviors or something like that and interrupt the thought process. So you start thinking differently rather than thinking the same way. So it's sort of like an interrupt effect. So at the same time, if we think about this, then if we think about if you come into contact with people, right? Sometimes it involves like peer separation. I don't even know if I spelled that right. And you know what? So be it. So, you think about in schools or like in a daycare setting or something like that, you may find that certain individuals are associated with one another, and when they're together, they commit more crime, but when they're separate, they're apart. So this will often lead, like school administrators or families to ask for, some kids to be separated. So they say you shouldn't associate with them. They have a bad influence. And the logic behind that is that you're reinforcing behavior in a way that is negative and creates a poor outcome, or at least an undesired outcome, right? That's also the point of, if we think about public education programs. when we think about families and schools as being, the biggest socializers, it's really more about like, okay, you're learning all these behaviors, you're learning what's right, what's wrong, and so on. But if we send out a public education effort, about like kindness, right, or the importance of, like global warming and limiting our emission usage, or if we think about any instances of where racism is wrong, all of those are instances of like public education programs that are designed to limit a behavior. So any kind of public education effort about an ongoing cause, whether it's drug use or sex trafficking or something like that, is to educate and say like these behaviors are wrong, right? So there's all about this messaging that happens to communicate acceptable and unacceptable behavior then, right? So it's very much about showing both positively and negatively, right? Now, keep in mind, right, this is not always negative. You could always punish people or always not, but you could also reward good behavior. So that could be, you see that someone is doing particularly well, and you say, wow, it's really great, you studied hard, I'm going to reward you for this by setting a good example, right? Whereas if you do something bad, maybe it's a public display of what's happening, and it feels really bad, and you end up doing that, right? Or not continuing that behavior. So that's sort of like the goal then, right? So learning theories are meant to unlearn negative behaviors and learn more positive pro-social behaviors. And so with that, we'll go ahead and end this module, and I'll see you guys